Yeah, so we're talking about how to keep our children safe online. How to keep our children safe online. This is a very, very important conversation because it concerns every one of us. We're in a very, very digitalized ecosystem, very, very digitalized world where it seems like we cannot do without being exposed to the online world, being exposed to digital devices. No matter how much you try to protect it, your children will be exposed to digital devices one way or the other, right? Um, and when we talk about screen, when we talk about the virtual world, we're not just talking about, because most times when we have this conversation, many people think it's just about children who have personal devices. Whether your children have personal devices, whether they watch TV, if they do sleepovers, if they have friends and classmates, all of those things can expose them to content or to the virtual world. And I always have a philosophy of, if you want to expose a child to anything, then you have to prepare them for that. You don't have the moral justification to be angry at a child or to discipline a child for something that you have not taught them or prepared them for. So it's really, really important that we understand that this conversation is for each and every one of us, whether our children are being are have access to personal devices that is connected to the internet or not, because one way or the other they are exposed to the online world, whether we want to accept it or we don't want to accept it, right? And this conversation is important because of the dangers. Again, when we talk about the harm or the risks of children being exposed to the digital space, many times people think that risk is associated to the length of time spent on those spaces, but that's not true. You can actually have a young person who is spending extended amount of time on the digital device, in the virtual world, on the online spaces, but they may not encounter risk. It can be as a result of luck, preparation, whatever. And then you can have a young person who is exposed to digital devices to a limited amount of time, and it will just be one mistake, one content that would alter the course of their lives, right? And I say this because at the back end of my practice, I see a lot of families, a lot of young people who come in, and when you make your assessments, you see that it's not like they're the ones who are like engrossed, who are addicted. Sometimes it might just be, oh, we visited a friend, or a friend visited us, or a relative visited us, and especially with pornographic content, right? This is something that I have seen, especially with exposure to pornographic content. It is many of the time, in my own experience, for the cases I have handled, it is usually not on the young person's device. It is usually on another person's device, on another adult's device, sometimes even on the parent's device, that they stumble on these things. So I say all of that to say it's not about you know the extended period of time, because somebody can be defensive and be like, well, my children are just doing 1 hour online, so the risk is low. No, there is no low risk as far as our children have access to these devices, right? So we have to think about it like that. That is not about, so you might have done your restriction and put time limits, and put family settings and all of that, and you feel like that's safe because they're not spending so long on those devices, so therefore there is no risk for them. But I want to assure you that that is not the right mindset to have. You want to have a mindset that as far as my child even gets 1 minute on their device, or 1 minute access to the internet, or 1 minute access to a digital device, that anything can happen. So when you have that in mind, you then start to understand that keeping our children safe online is not about restriction, but about empowering them, right? So if you don't live with anything in this whole conversation, I want you to have that at the back of your mind, that yes, restriction is important, because restriction helps you regulate the time, also helps you to build skills like delayed gratification, choices, regulation, and all of that. But I want to highlight to you that the safety aspect of it is not, you cannot achieve that solely by restriction, especially as they start to grow, right? Because at some point you will no longer be able to restrict them, and if you haven't built the skills that they require as they tend towards independent use, they will still struggle. So it's a balance between restriction and empowering them with the right knowledge, with the skills, with the know-how, the street smartness, just like as you would say to a young person that you're trying to equip in how to navigate in school, navigate in the community. You also want to think about, how can I make my young person street smart in the sense of the digital space, right? How do I help them to recognize the risks? How do I help them to recognize grooming? How do I help them to recognize fake news? That is how we want to start thinking about it, because it's not just about restriction. You can hide that. I've had a mom who says, "Oh, I hide my children's device, and when I'm going to work, I hide it and all of that." But the kids found it. They found it, and they'll go there. They'll pick it up when she's away. And when they know her timing, they know her program. Before she comes back, they will keep it back. She only realized because one day she came back and the phone was hot, and she was wondering, how did the phone become hot if nobody used it? So all those hide and seek may not work, right? So first things that we want to understand is that keeping our children safe online, it's more about empowerment than it is about restriction, right? It's more about empowerment than it is about restriction. And for you to be able to empower your child to stay safe online, you yourself, as the parent, as the adult, would have to understand what the risks are, right? So the first question is, what am I even up against? What are the risks? What are the challenges? So you have to understand it from that perspective, because if you don't know what you're up against, you're still going to struggle to be able to communicate that, because children now, they don't take your, oh, don't do this, don't do that. You have to be factual with your argument. You have to show evidence for why you're doing what you're doing. So I'll give you an example. My daughter is 11. We live in the UK. And in the UK, in her class, she's in year 6. In her class, I'd say 80% of her classmates have phones, and it's not like, it's nothing out of the ordinary. They come to school with their phones. It's just like expected, so to say. But we on our own side, we have decided not to, give her access to phone. Personally, I'm gonna delay that as long as possible. Um, but I didn't just tell her that, oh, you can't have phone, right? I had to explain to her it is a continuous conversation that we started having from when she was 7 years old, right? Even like just shortly before we even moved here, when I realized the level of access. I mean, it's easier to restrict if you're in Nigeria, because I don't think it's the access is as common as it is here. So when I realized the level of access that kids had to devices here, we started having that conversation. And I've had that conversation from multiple angles. And this is really important if you're going to keep your child safe. And if you have been in our community for long enough, you know that I would always say you cannot teach your child anything if the base is not covered, and the base is relationship. So if you don't have that relationship with your child, it's hard to teach them. So we have a lot of conversation around that. So please, connection is really, really important, because for whatever you want to teach your child, it will fall on the backdrop of that connection. And so, yes, we've had that conversation from multiple angles, right? And this is what your dinner tables are for. This is what viral videos are for. So when you see viral videos of things that have happened to young people, things that have gone bad, yes, it can make you afraid, it can make you panic, it can make you go to hyper mode where you want to go back home and pack all their devices and hide. But is that really effective? I always say, when I see a news online, the first question before I start giving advice, before I start making comments in the comment section and advising the person, I always think about it from a perspective of, this could be me, this could be my child. And if this is my child, what could I have, like, what would I have done differently to ensure, or what can I do differently to ensure that this is not my child, depending on what the incident is, right? So those are what those conversations are for, right? Have those conversations around, how does this affect your brain? How does this affect your focus? How does this affect your academics? What are the risks that this exposes you to? And I'm telling you conversations that I have, because now I'm that the fact that my daughter doesn't have a phone, the fact that it's not like we cannot afford it. I have an iPhone 11 here that is not being used and is lying there. She knows it's lying there, but she also knows she cannot have it. So, um, it's just because we have had that conversation consistently to say, what are the I'm still working. What are the sorry about that. We've had that conversation around what is the impact of this on your brain. And I'm not just speaking, we're also looking at maybe articles, we're looking at videos on how this can impact your brain. The truth about young people is, a young person does not have regulation, because their brain is not fully developed. So they don't have the capacity to think through and see the extent or the consequences of the choices they're making today. And that's why we're in their lives, to paint pictures for them, to be able to see the extent or how things can go wrong, and to help them see different scenarios, right? And the way you have that conversation matters. And that is where many of us are getting it wrong, where we're arguing. We have created atmospheres in our home where anything that comes out of our mouth to our children's ears, it looks like judgment, it looks like argument, it looks like condemnation. So you have to create an atmosphere where you can actually have conversations and bounce off ideas and listen to them and see their own perspective, and then use your superior intelligence to superimpose on that and paint pictures for them to see that, yes, I see where you're coming from, but have you also thought about it from this perspective? Do you know what can go wrong? And that's how um you're not just even stopping them from doing what they're not supposed to be doing. You're also teaching them critical thinking. You're also teaching them how to make decisions in future when you're not there, right? So I know that maybe if you've come to this conversation thinking, oh, there are 10 steps to keeping our children safe online. Yes, there are those strategies. There are things that I could tell you to do. And I have a lot of them in my book, Parenting in the Digital Age. I have loads of those of strategies. But the foundation of everything, regardless of any strategy you want to put in, is your ability to connect to your child and your ability to have these ongoing conversations. And also, another thing this ongoing conversation does for you is that it also helps your child to trust you. in the sense that you cannot monitor them 24 hours of the time. But if you have built that basis, if you have built that trusting relationship, they can actually see something online and bring it back to you. An incident can happen in school and they bring it back to you. They can encounter something weird online and they'll bring that conversation back to you, because you have created that space where there's an ongoing conversation, right? So it's really, really important. That is your first baseline. Have that conversation from perspective of the impact of this constant exposure on your brain, the impact on your self-esteem, how it can expose you to risk, digital footprints, and how it can come and bite you in the future. Just really have those conversations from different angles, right? Things that you see online, you can bring it to your dinner table and have the conversation. What do you think? This is what happened to this young person. What do you think? For the younger ones, for the little ones, because we cannot have these conversations yet, what we want to do for them, there are recommendations around the number of hours that they should be exposed to devices. So what we can do for them is actually, for the little ones, 0 to 3, 3 to 5, preschool age, what we can do for them is to limit exposure for them, in the sense that we don't want that to become their primary mode of entertainment. So engage them with other things, engage them in play, engage them with independent play, allow them to learn how to get bored, allow their brain to learn how not to be overstimulated. So for the younger ones, there's really not much we can do in terms of having conversations with them. But what we can do for them is to not present them with that device, to protect them from it and to help them to learn how to cope. Because a lot of children, again, why they're so addicted to their devices is because it's a form of escape, it's a coping mechanism, is something that helps them regulate. And many parents have fed into that. When your child is crying, instead of you to find a way of calming them down, the next thing you do is pull out your phone, pull out cocoa melon and give it to them. So what you're teaching that child is, when I'm dysregulated, what calms me down is a device. So you're even limiting your child's ability to grow their emotional intelligence, to grow their brain development, because you're not allowing them to process emotion, you're not allowing them to learn how to process their emotions and feel what they're feeling. You're just dumbing it down and numbing it down by just giving them devices. So for the little ones, it is our responsibility to limit access, to limit exposure, and to expose them to independent play, right? But for the bigger ones, we have the duty of teaching them the skills that they would need as they progress towards independent use, right? So I'll give a few minutes for reflection. Um, those of us who have older children, what conversations are you having? And from what I have said, what resonates with you? What reflections are you having? So I told you it would be interactive. So please share with me before we jump into the next phase of the conversation. Hello, everyone is quiet.
Yeah, well, good evening, everyone.
Hello, Ijoma,
Hello?
you want to say something? Yes.
Yes, good evening, all. It's quite late here, but um, so my kids are 14 plus and 13 plus, so and the girls. In my own case, they have a device. They have devices. They have a phone and they have um, iPads. So um, and I mean it's inadvertent. It's not, they have a phone that they have access to when they are on vacation, so midterm breaks, and then when they have to travel back. So definitely it's something we need. The rest of the time they're in school. So there's a reasonable amount of control. Uh, then the devices are also in school, but they are submitted and only used when they have to have exams. So let's say on the school front, there's no access except of course, since I'm far away from them, except there's some sneaking in. Young people always find a way around because
Yeah.
the good thing about this conversation is I am I would say to a reasonable extent that they're able to speak with me. So they can tell me, oh, somebody, a day student brought a phone and handed it to you know, they
Mm,
always find a way. That's the
mm,
summary. I mean, I was
yeah.
in boarding house too, so phones were not our problem, but maybe ours was as simple as not going out of school to buy
Mm,
akara. It
mm-hmm,
was kose at the time, and it was a big deal. But people still did these things. So just to let us know that we're not really immune. So,
mm,
but let's say the school space will do their
mm,
best.
yeah.
When they are home, uh, I've also learned to, because I know that they have more access than I would have wanted, and it's
Mm,
inadvertent. So I, when we return after a day or two of rest, we try to lay down our ground rules again. So each of the older girls is entitled to 2 hours, and the little one, 45 minutes to 1 hour. So so we go over that, and then so how are we going to do it? For certain, at night, they submit their devices to me.
mm,
So they gotten to that place where they would bring it, even if I forget or I sleep off. So at least there's that level of confidence
yeah.
that, I mean, there's children, they still sleep off. But sometimes they deliberately stay late and I sleep off and they come in late. So, you know, just to let us know that it's really a continuous thing. It's not like a
Yeah.
surveillance, but
Yeah.
we 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 really, like you said, must empower them. I remember something that happened some maybe a year or more ago, where I was, changing passwords and just trying to keep these things away. And my older girl, just one day, she looked at me and said to me, "Mommy, I can I'm able to get passwords of the neighbors." And I was, I think I remember sharing this with you. And she, this was just offhandedly. And she said, "Look, even if I don't want to use ours, I can clone your own password.
Mm,
I can clone the neighbors." And that was something. But again,
yeah.
that gave me some confidence because, okay, so if you say that, this was not bragging, but she was just trying to say, let trust us enough to know that if I tell you I'm not on the internet, I'm not on the internet. That's not to say that you won't look over or get their history and things like that. But
Mm,
again, we have to, as they grow, let them know that you believe in them sufficiently. So
mm,
you want to use lines like, I have confidence in you to do this thing. So don't let me down, and
mm,
that kind of thing. So I
yeah.
just wanted to put that out. I don't know if I made any sense, but
Yeah, yeah.
perhaps it
Thank you.
doesn't.
So that has even made the next conversation like a lot. I mean, everything you've said just reiterated what I have been trying to say. That is not just about the control, because if you're trying to control, restrict, especially for when they're getting towards preteen, teenage years, you will wear yourself out, because how much can you really control? Are you going to be there every point in time? Yes, you will control and limit, but the main skill you want to teach them is to help them understand, the risks, help them to understand how to manage themselves, help them to understand, what is out there, and how to keep themselves safe, right? So while you're having that conversation now, I said there is the part of empowerment and then there is the part of restriction, right? While you're having those conversations, then you also have to put systems in place to maintain boundaries, right? So this is what we're talking about. What can I do practically to ensure that, they're not spending extended hours online? While I have said that, exposure to risk is not um directly related to how much time, but extended hours can also like open you up to risk. It also have like a lot of impact on psychological development, on focus. It can distract and all of that. So it's important that we are very, very conscious and very, very intentional around, putting systems in place, and while still having that relationship and still having that continuous conversation, putting systems in place at home to ensure that, they're not just on their phone every point in time. So it would look different for different people. I'm not one to impose my systems and my structures on people, because I don't know what your family dynamics are. I don't know what your support system looks like, but I want you to think about the safety of your child. How important is that to you, and how far can you go to protect that, right? So, what systems do you want to put in place? Decide how many hours is reasonable. You can just Google the expectations. There are expectations according to the World Health Organization based on age. Many times, not very, very realistic for present day families, but you want to keep it within that timeline. What I have done over the years is that I don't do device, TV, anything. I try not to do it the weekdays. Aside for risk, I'm also looking at impact on sleep. I'm looking at impact on focus. I'm looking at the distraction, brain development, and all of that. So I try to keep it off during the weekdays. It might be difficult if your children have had like sporadic exposures over the years. So it might be that you think about, how do we start winning them? So if at this point we don't have structure, how can we start by reducing the number of hours they're exposed to every day, and then continuously, reducing them when they start to realize that, well, I haven't died because I haven't been on my device all day, right? And while you're also, if your child has been exposed without supervision or without proper supervision over a long period, while you're also trying to win them from that, you want to think about alternative activities or alternative habits to replace what you're removing. So, because when you remove the device and you're not replacing it with a bit of structure, a bit of activity, that's when you will have a lot of problem and a lot of behavioral challenges. So you're thinking, okay, um we want to remove device, we want to cut it off during the weekdays. Then what happens during the weekdays when they come back from school? You have to have that conversation. If your children are up to age, the next best step to do after this meeting, now tomorrow is Saturday, is to sit down with them and say, okay, this is what I plan to do, and this is why. The why is really, really important, and let that why be framed, let that conversation be framed in a way that they see the benefit to them. They see it as, it's not like you're just trying to control them, but it's because you love them. It's because you have seen how harmful this can be to them, and you're trying to protect them from that harm. Let frame that conversation in that way so they can see it, and then think about, all right, how do we start? This is my idea. What do you think? What do you now? When you're doing this, it's not like I'm not promising you that your child is going to say, oh yes, we're not going to be, they're going to cry, they're going to say it's not fair, they're going to, say a lot of things, but you have to put your feet down. You have to help them know that it's for their own good, and you have to also stay consistent with the conversation that you're having. At some time, you're their parents, it's you that will feel the energy in your home. Sometimes you might have to meet yourselves in the middle ground for a starting point. So for example, if you're saying no weekdays and you feel the energy and it seems unfair in that moment, you can say, well, we can reduce it to 1 day a week, but eventually we're gonna have to retract that. So just really explore it based on the age of your children, based on your family dynamics, based on your ability to engage them with alternative activities within the week and all of that. Then even the weekend, you have to think about how to manage, that as well. Because now what happens is, if you're restricting during the weekdays, they seem to then overdose to catch up during the weekend. So also think of that balance, right? Then think of areas in your home where, like, you don't want devices. So for example, in the bedrooms, on the dining table. So when you're eating, I don't like, just eat your food. And when you're about to go to bed, that in fact, just keep it in the open spaces, keep it in the open areas. Especially as they're becoming teenagers, that thing of everybody carry their phone, and everybody's just on their phone inside their room, private. I don't know. My kids are still 11, 8, so I really don't know. But it's not something that I would want to be a predominant thing in my home, right? And why I say that is because I work with young people a lot, and I have seen instances where young people are going through stuff, and parents are not picking it up because of that thing of everybody's in their room doing their own thing. So as much as possible, create instances where we're all together. So it can be one evening a week, or a couple of evenings a week, where, yes, even if we're all on our devices, even if we're all is, so let's say for example they use their devices on Saturdays, right? So even if Saturday is free device time for everyone, can we all just be in the living room? Because there are things you can pick up just by seeing your child's demeanor, that if everyone is just very isolated, you may not be able to pick it up. So think about it like that, right? And beyond setting those boundaries, also think about um teaching them skills around identifying risks, right? Having conversation not just about the impact of exposure on them, but teaching them practical what the risks are, right? So for example, teaching them how to identify fake news, teaching them what it looks like for what cyberbullying looks like, right? Just have that conversation. You might be amazed that they they might even be victims of cyberbullying without realizing, right? So it may not be like asking, are you being cyberbullied, right? Just really maybe one evening having conversation. What do you think cyberbullying is? This is what I read. Let's ask ChatGPT says cyberbullying is this. What do you think about that? Is there anybody in your class being cyberbullied? Just really teaching them, how do you recognize cyberbullying? So what would you do when somebody makes a comment on your post, or when somebody says something, or when they add you in a group and they're saying things about you? All of those kind of things. Have those conversation. Have conversation about grooming. Have conversation about fake adverts. Have conversation about how what you post would can stay forever and come to haunt you later. So one incident is um the recent trending that trended recently about Simi, right? About the guy from Paystack, the things that they posted like from years back, how it came back to haunt them. That's that thing I was telling you, that when things happen online, it gives us opportunity to really just have these conversations with our children, to say, okay, see this person, she's a celebrity, she's doing well, people love her, but see how they went to dig up what she posted, over 10 years ago or so, and they're using it to judge her and cancel her in the present time. This is why we really have to think about what we post before we post it. It's important that we see our children as people. We see them as people who we can talk to and actually just bounce off ideas with, right? Because it helps you just have conversation in a very relatable way, right? So aside setting those boundaries, you also want to teach them skills and rules of engagement. And when I want to paint this analogy, one of the things I say to people is, you're not going to send your child to a corner shop without telling them, okay, when you get to the junction, look left and right before you cross. When you get to the tail, this is how you pay. Don't talk to strangers, don't do this, don't do that. If someone is calling you, don't. Many of us, even up until now, we're afraid of letting our children walk alone on the streets, even in our neighborhood. We will still, even if we feel like they can, we will still come out to the door. We will still look at them and make sure that they're confident enough to walk and get to where we're telling them. We'll still be calling self if they have a phone. We'll still be calling to say, "Oh, did you get there safe?" But for some reason, we will give our children devices without proper preparation, without realizing that this is an actual world that we're sending them into, and that there are people in that actual virtual world that have different motives, right? I was listening to something recently and someone said, did you remember a time where people used to be arrested for harassing children on the streets, for kidnapping children, for trying to, harm children on the street? But that has significantly reduced over the years. And the person asked the question, she said, where do you think those people have gone to? They didn't disappear. They have just moved from walking the street to going online. And that's a scary thing to realize. There are people online with the sole motive of getting access to our children. And our children should not be ignorant of this. I have a colleague here who said, in fact, he himself, one of the ways that he demonstrated this to his children is that he created an account on one of their gaming apps, and he used to like play with them, chat with them as somebody else, like as their age mate. And the day he revealed to them that he was the one, they were all surprised. Another of my friend who is a teacher, what he did was he teaches ICT. What he did was that he got his friend who was very, very huge, this kind of very masculine, gym muscle built kind of person. And the person was in the ICT room, created an account. Then he created an account for his students, and they were exchanging message with this person. And after they finished exchanging conversation with this person, he told them to describe who they were talking to. And many of them described this person as a very lovely person, sounds like a female, looks really, really charming, like our peer, and all of that. He said, okay, I'm going to open the door and this person is going to walk in, and you tell me if he actually looks like who you imagined him to be, or him or her to be. And when the guy walked in, they were amazed that this was a person that they've been talking to for over a while. So what that taught those children is that the person behind the name, the username, might not be who they say they are. And we have to find a way to help our young people to understand that, to help our young people to actually articulate those risks, however you want to do it. Help them articulate that this space can be risky, and there are people there that um can be very can be out to cause harm to you, and teach them how to protect themselves from those kind of people, how to recognize them, and how to protect themselves from those kind of people. And if you're looking for ways to teach this, if you're in this conversation and wondering, how do I teach this? How do I teach this? I recommend that you read my book. We have a lot of conversation starters, how to start those conversations, what to say, how to say it, and all of that. And then finally, you also want to um have like a control. So if you have because again, children will be children while we're teaching them, while we're trusting them, right? There are some times when they will want to push their boundaries. So you also want to have develop consequences for actions, right? So in the conversation that you're having, you would want to have like stipulated consequences for, all right, we've agreed that we're going to do this, and when we don't do this, what will the consequences be for, that. And one thing about consequences is that please try as much as possible to make it clear. Try as much as possible that it is fair and related to the behavior. So for example, if I say use your phone for 4 hours, and you use it and you consciously extend the 4 hours, fair consequence might be that I'll take it for a day so you don't get your 4 hours the next time, or I get back the hours that you have used on top of the 4 hours that you were supposed to use. Um, it will be unfair to say you would never have your phone again, right? You will never have your phone again might come in when you have used the consequences, and the child is just trying to be defiant. Then that might be when you then expand on the consequence. But try as much as possible for your, because we're also trying to teach fairness. Yes, justice, fairness. We're also trying to teach that this is not about me trying to get you. This is about me trying to teach you to be accountable. So let the consequence be clear, let it be communicated, let it be fair, and let it be consistent. Because what happens when we're not consistent with our consequences is that we're teaching our young people that they can get away with anything, right? And in the moment where you're applying consequences, because that can shape the dynamics of your relationship, you want to be firm, but you also want to still remain kind. And I keep telling people this: in your relationship with your children, even with your spouse, even with your friends, you can be kind and still be firm. I can say I won't do that. I can say I won't take that, but I don't have to raise my voice. I don't have to be derogatory. I don't have to insult you, right? So the same thing with our children. If I'm taking away my kids' device, I don't expect them to just take it lightly. They're gonna cry. They're gonna be sad. The older they get, they might be banging of doors. I'm not gonna chase you and match your energy. I'm gonna insist that I will have the phone. I'm gonna still tell you that I love you and I'm doing it because I love you. And when the tension is low, we can have the conversation. If you want to have the conversation, if you're reasonable enough to have the conversation, I'll explain my rationale and we establish that. But that consequence must happen. And when you do that, you're able to do that effectively. There's a kind of level of trust and respect that it builds between yourself and your child. So let your consequence. A lot of us, the problem that we have is that we are not able. We only do consequences when we're angry, and it must be in anger. And then sometimes we're too tired to do it, and sometimes when children push us, we just allow them. And what we're doing in all of that is that we're confusing them, and they will start to look for loopholes to manipulate us. But when your child understands that they cannot manipulate you, not with cry, not with, most times, especially for the younger ones, it's a game of who can wear who out, right? And that's when a different conversation, that's when your nervous system and your healing and your inner childhood work is really, really important, because that cry sometimes it can be the pin that will make many people lose control. But that's a different conversation. But yeah, it is a game of who wears who out, and you have to put your feet down and actually insist and maintain those boundaries. And this is also how you're teaching your children, consistency. You're teaching them that actions have consequences, and all of that. And it teaches accountability as well. Another thing is also us modeling what we want to see, right? What is your own habits around devices, and how are you communicating that? So when I say how are you communicating that, for example, Most people think, okay, because I'm restricting my child to have 1 hour of device, then I also have to have 1 hour of device. But then how realistic is that? For me, that's not realistic because I work. I work from home most of the times. I work on my computer and I run my business on my phone most of the times as well. So while I understand that I have to model being away from my device for them, which I actively try to do. So, for example, sometimes we have times where everybody drop your device. That would be predominantly me drop my device, come out, and we watch something together, or we just sit together and talk together. While I do that, I'm also communicating that this is work. I'm actually working. This is not entertainment. This is not me just scrolling. This is me working. So they understand it. And many times when they say, like when they see me on phone, they will ask, they'll say, "Are you working?" And sometimes my son will say, "Are you No, you're not working. You're on Instagram." All those kind of things. So we have to communicate that and also bring that balance and also keep accountable on our own part because children would, model what they see us do as well. So really, really important. So in summary, keeping our children safe, I started with saying it's not just about restriction, that is more about empowerment. Because why? When you restrict, is not sustainable. When you restrict alone, is not sustainable. So the foundation will be empowerment, and that empowerment is built on the backdrop of the relationship that you have with your children. So again, connection is the baseline for anything we want to teach our children. So have those conversations around, why too much exposure is no good, while limited exposure is for the benefits, the impact, and the risk associated with exposure and digital devices and being online, right? And then set the right boundaries. So in my book, there's something I shared around having a family device media use contract, where even after having that conversation, coming up with those boundaries, coming up with those consequences, that you document them and have it as a contract and everybody signs and it is binding to everyone who is involved in that. And in the book, it has template by template for different age groups, right? Where you can have that conversation and draft a contract and everybody signs it, right? You can also have policies. Yes, I forgot to put this. Policies are very important, especially for people. I don't know if you live in Nigeria, this will be applicable to you. In Nigeria, we have people visit and stay a lot. So if you have people who visit and stay in your house, whom you don't know what they're doing with their phone, like always when you have another person in your home, always, or you send your child to another person's home, always know that anything can happen because you don't know what people do with their phone, you don't know what they store on their phone. So one of the skills you want to teach your children is not to touch anybody's phone for any reason. Don't touch anybody's phone for any reason, because like I said when I started this conversation, most of the exposure to porn that I have seen in my practice is young people accessing maybe older cousins' phone, parents' phone, sometimes uncle's phone, and all of that, and then they stumble into things that they're not supposed to stumble into. So think about it as well as something you need to teach your children. If you have people visiting, don't touch, don't use, don't stick to your own, or stick to my own, the one that I'm sure of. If you visit anybody, let nobody show you, oh, go through my pictures, do this and do that on my phone. No, try to keep your hands to yourself. So have those kind of guidelines and policies for how things work in your home. This is how we do things in our home, and communicate that, and then finally come up with consequences, um, and also teach the risks. That teaching risk is an ongoing conversation, and you have to be abreast with understanding the risk. In my book, I shared different types of risks. There are four major categories of risk. So risks of conduct, so how a person conducts themselves online, what they post, what they share, their associated risks to that. Risk of contact, being exposed and being accessible, This is where you're teaching your child, about grooming, about predators, and also how to avoid them, in terms of how do you block off people, how do you ensure that you're not accepting people you don't know, how do you vet people before you accept them, if you're and this is not just like, if you might be thinking this is just social media. This is not just social media. If your child is playing games like Roblox, Minecraft, all those multiplayer games, this is also applicable, right? So there's commercial risk. So all these risks of adverts, pop-ups and all of that, where children can think it's just harmless, and then they click something and then it takes them to a whole different sites altogether, right? Conduct, contact, commercial, and one other risk I can't remember now. Anyway, get the book, and then you see all the risk there. You would see how to have those conversations with your children, and also be abreast with terminologies, because sometimes that is language is important. So sometimes that is your inroad to having those conversations, especially for your older children, preteens and teens. Understanding the online lingua might be your inroad to actually helping them see that you're abreast with what's going on and you know what is going on. So a simple chat GPT prompt, asking about what are Gen Z's, Gen Alphas, what are the risks in their language or stuff like that. Come up with those and just have them as a conversation prompt to, you know, have those conversations with your children. Yeah, so essentially, it's not a one off thing, it is an ongoing conversation. And because the digital landscape is constantly changing every day, we have to really, really be hands, foot, and heart in all of it, and keep our eyes open as to what is happening, right? Next week, I'm bringing two people to come and have a conversation with us about gaming. Um, and why am I doing that? My husband, for a very long time, my children did not have access to games because I don't understand how it works, and I cannot expose them to something I cannot manage. So for a very long time, they asked for games they never got. But when my husband moved here, he does play games, so he got a PS5, and it has been interesting. It has been an interesting thing to see, you know, to observe and to see. And there are a lot of positives, if I'm being honest. I used to be one of those people that felt like, I don't want this in my house. But there's been a lot of positive for my son, because my son had a problem with special coordination and all of that. So I've kind of like seen some positives, but I also know that there are lots that we need to learn about it, right? If we're going to expose our children to something, we have to learn how that thing works, and we'll have to learn how 5 minutes, please. We have to learn how to manage it. And you cannot teach or control or help your child manage what you don't understand. And this is really why I have searched these people out. They are like, I know them. They have a company where they teach gaming, but in a positive way, where they teach you what to look out for, the kind of games that are good for your children, how to manage, how to control, and all of that. So I'm bringing them next week for us to have a conversation with them. It's building upon what we have talked about today. If your children are gaming, if they have access to any Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, PS5, Xbox, all of those, Nintendo Switch, then please be in that conversation. Even though they don't have it yet, they might have it in the future. It's important that you know what's happening in that gaming world, and how to protect your children, and how to use it in a positive way to build skills for coordination, discipline, reward, and all of that. So that would be our conversation next week, right? Um, so before we go, we have a few minutes. Does anyone have any question? Any question?
Yes, I have a question.
Everyone is quiet. Is that a
I have
good
a
sign or a
question.
bad sign?
Can nobody hear me?
Is a good sign that we are
Yes,
listening.
Mema, yes.
Okay. So my question is, especially around using, what's it called? Using technology for children.
Mm,
Um, so my own case is that um, it's the hyperactivity for me, and that's
mm,
why I totally like not like totally cut it off, but I realized that they use a lot of technology screen in school, and
mhm,
so it's also when they get home I just say automatically no screen, right? But during the weekends, I'm like, okay, let's do maybe evenings. We do screen in the evenings. And I realized that the only thing that that my son likes to watch is Minecraft. But it's so because I don't allow him play games,
mm,
he just watches. I don't know how to describe this. Like somebody doing a comment, like
mm. Commentary. Commentary.
commentary. Thank you,
Mm,
somebody doing a commentary on the whatever. And so it's like the person is the one playing it. And so he can be there for hours.
mm,
Right. And then recently started having conversations around, oh, mommy, why don't you allow me play Minecraft? Oh, why don't I say it's not educative? It's okay,
mm,
at least awakening is educative. Why don't I let him play awakening? My problem is not that you can't play. My problem is how addictive these things get.
mhm,
And I heard you talk about shielding them does not really solve anything. And I know that I will also get to a point where I'll no longer be able to,
mm,
technically shield him from these things because he's doing them in school anyway. And
mm,
he's just coming to tell me about them. What would
mm,
you advise? Would you advise also, and it's one of the reasons why he doesn't have a tab, we don't have a home computer, it's just TV. If you cannot watch TV, just leave it.
mm,
Once in a while I can allow him get on my computer, but that's very rarely. What would
mm,
you advise? Would you advise, okay, getting getting a home computer and then having, because I fear regulation
mm,
and I fear the overstimulation that extra technology brings.
mhm,
So in a bid not to overprotect,
mm.
what would be a safe place to stay? Do you get what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I get what you're trying to ask. And that's why when I started, I said it will look different for different people. So, for
Mm-hmm,
example, your child is already hyper, right?
mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm,
any extra stimulation would be an added one.
mm-hmm,
What would be recommended for your child will be different from what is recommended for a child who is not as hyper as your child. Do you understand? So
mm-hmm,
you are the expert of your child. And personally, I would say as much as possible, if you can keep them away completely, please
mm-hmm,
do, right?
mm-hmm,
If you, because if he's already exposed in school, are you able to measure how much exposure he's having in school, right? So if he's already getting that entertainment in school and you're able to protect him at home, please do. And with those gaming apps, if you don't have the capacity to be hands-on,
mm-hmm,
don't expose that. I did not expose my kids because I did not have the capacity to be hands-on until my
mm-hmm,
husband came and joined us here. That was when, because I then delegated him to be responsible for that. Do you get?
mm-hmm. Yeah,
So as much as, yes, we want them to have those experiences, but we have to weigh the risks and the costs. Do you get? So there's
yeah,
no point giving your child an entertainment that you cannot supervise, especially at his age,
yeah,
right? I know the age of your son, so that's why I'm saying what I'm saying. So it's
yeah,
really thinking about the child in front of you, thinking about the capacity that you have. Ultimately, think about it from a perspective of keeping your child safe. Really, there's no hard and fast rule, right?
mm-hmm,
So, for
mm-hmm,
example, what screen time will look like for my daughter. Like if we were not trying to maintain a unified front, right? How strict I would be for my daughter in terms of screen time and exposure would be different from my son, because my daughter is a bit more regulated, more have a more will, right? My son is more spontaneous and more
Mhm.
inclined to people pleasing and jumping on trends, right? So it will look different for different young people. So look at your child, and I'm sure that you have the God has given you the child, so you know your gods will tell you. You have the intuition, but the problem is capacity. Also think about capacity. What capacity do I have? Do Can I monitor this? Can I, if I start this, can I finish it? If you can't answer those questions, continue to delay for as long as you can.
Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Phoebe.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Vivian. Good evening, everyone. So, I wanted to first start by saying that if there's anyone on this call who has not read your book around the children and the internet, I think it's a must-have. I got that book almost immediately it was launched, and it helped me significantly. My
Thank
children
you.
are quite young. My own, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. I said thank you. Yeah.
Oh, so my children are quite young, and it just came in handy, let me say so, because they were getting to the stage where I said, okay, this is the internet age, and there's a point where keeping them away is rather, keeping them behind, and get to make them to struggle because somehow they use these things to even be able to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been quite helpful, just that sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough, right? So I've tried to do all of the safeguarding in terms of, okay, they don't have devices yet. And what I did was I now decided to introduce them to, um, how do I put it, like resourceful use of the computers. So they get to do some lessons, they get to, just learn around it. So my first exposure, based on some of the things I saw in the book, is that I'm exposing them to creative use of these
Mm-hmm.
devices and not just abuse and all of that. But where my challenge comes, I realize that I have some aunties, uncles come around. Sometimes, before you know, my children are spending time peeping into their phones when they are watching their skits, or so I discovered that sometimes I find out they get to uh, mimic some of the skit makers that they must have seen, and I'm like, what, where did you see this from, so I know you mentioned a bit about not allowing them to access people's phones. But in my case, it's not like they pick up the phones when the person is not there, right? They could just be around an uncle or an auntie who is around the house watching whatever he's watching, and then they are so engrossed in it. And I'm like, oh, how do I address this? Because of course, I'm not always there,
Mm.
even if I'm able to say, okay, don't look into anybody's phone. If I'm not there to check it, it's like they are drawn to it regardless. So
Yeah. Yeah.
how
I
do
get what
I
you mean.
how do I
I
address
get what you mean, and it's really
that?
it's a dicey one, right?
Yeah.
Because because again, our uncles and aunties can be a bit sensitive people. Um, so it all depends on the person. But I would always say I would put my children first, even if I offend you, right? So it might be that the conversation you need to have will be with the auntie and uncle. I have a cousin who, if you like, be the president of Nigeria, I cannot watch Nollywood in her house. So even when my mom went to do Omugo, my mom loves Nollywood. So when my mom went to do Omugo in her house, my mom did not, she did not let me. I said, we don't watch Nollywood in this house, auntie. So it's really like having those conversations about people who visit and people who stay in your home to, again, having it in a really, really respectful and cordial way, explaining the rationale behind that decision to say, please, can you not watch these things when my kids are around? And this is why, this is why, this is why we don't want to expose them to this. Do you understand? Some people will still pick offense. I know our brothers and sisters, how we can be, oh, are you saying my nieces and nephews and all of that? Are you saying I'm stupid? Or but just really calmly and respectfully still insist. You can only control to the extent that you can, but it's important to just start that conversation. One thing is that when you have those conversations, it's still, even though people are defensive in the first instance, it registers in their head, and somehow it kind of like make them a bit conscious of how they behave around you and around your children, whether they want it or not. If you have the conversation, even if they're defensive in the moment, they will still think about it, and it kind of like, the behavior, you see some changes or some adjustments, even if it's not 100% perfect. But that's the much you can do, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was helpful.
Yeah. Um, do we have any other question? Okay. In the absence of any other question, I would say good night to everyone, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Please try. I have moved mountains to bring these people. It would be on a Saturday morning because that's when they're able to join us. I've tried to bring them. They're really, really good. I met them at an event and listened to them. I've consulted with them for my own self. Um, so please come in and let's have that conversation. I'll share the flyers in the group right now. Please help me. If you're finding what we're doing here helpful, please help me spread the word whenever you see us share anything and bring people in. We want this message to get to as many people as possible. And if you're here, please get my book. It would, I if even if it's not me that wrote that book, I will buy it because it's really, really resourceful and helpful. All right, take care. Good night, and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you so much. Good
Bye
Bye.
night.
to everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. God bless.
Good night.